Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
There's something about Mother's Day that never sat right with me, even before it turned into the kind of day you remember for all the wrong reasons. You know how people talk about traditions, laughter, and homemade food, roses on the table, and all that sentimental crap? Yeah, not in our family. In our house, Mother's Day always felt more like a performance, something between a guilt offering and a power play, and trust me, Linda, my mother, never missed her cue. She wore her motherhood like a damn crown, but only when there was an audience. The rest of the time, it was more of a whip. This year, I told myself it would be different. I had convinced myself, again, that maybe now, with everything I've been through, everything I've built, maybe she'd look at me and see what I see when I look at myself in the mirror. Not perfect, not even close, but a man who's trying his damn hardest to do right by the people he loves. A man who's earned the word father the hard way. I brought my daughter, Juno, with me this time. She's 6, and she loves fiercely. She made Linda a card with little stick figures and glitter, and you'd think that would have softened something in her, but no. Linda took the card with the kind of smile people put on at funerals, tight, polite, and paper-thin. We sat down at the table, the three of us, plus Mark, my husband, who already knew the look in my eyes, said, "Stay alert." Lunch was roast beef, overcooked like always. The gravy was congealed in the little boat she insists on using every year, the one with the tiny chip in the side that she claims adds character. She talked about the church bake sale and some woman named Nancy from her book club who's apparently going through a scandalous divorce. Nothing about me. Nothing about Juno. Nothing about Mark. As if we were just background noise to the ongoing monologue that is her life. And then it came. Like it always does. One moment of silence too long, the kind that makes your skin crawl because you know it means she's about to drop the kind of comment that ruins the rest of your day or your year. She looked at me across the table, fork still in hand, and said, "You know, it's just different when it's your own blood. I mean, it's not the same when you adopt." Not really. It landed so fast, so sharp, I didn't even feel it at first. But then it hit like a delayed punch. I felt the heat crawl up my neck into my ears. Mark froze mid-bite. Juno looked confused, because she's smart enough to know something just happened, but not old enough to understand that sometimes people you love say the cruelest things wearing a smile. I didn't say anything right away. Not because I didn't have words. I had too many. Too many years of biting my tongue. Too many Sunday dinners pretending her microaggressions weren't eating me alive. Too many nights holding Juno when she cried because someone at school told her she didn't look like her dad, and wondering how the hell I was supposed to protect her from pain when I was still unpacking my own. So I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope. Cream-colored. Handwritten. A little worn at the corners from being touched too many times in too many moments of indecision. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. She knew exactly what it was the moment she saw it. Her face didn't just go pale. It went hollow, like she'd seen a ghost sit down at the table. I didn't say anything. I just laid it on the placemat beside my untouched plate and met her eyes. She blinked once. Twice. Her lip twitched. "What is that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice tighter than piano wire. And I said, calmly, clearly, "You want to talk about real parents? Maybe ask the daughter you gave up when you were 17. Dead silence. Mark looked like someone had yanked the floor out from under him. Juno stared down at her mashed potatoes, probably trying to decide if she was in trouble or if the adults were just being weird again. Linda didn't blink. For a long second, I thought she might laugh it off or call me a liar. But she didn't. She reached for her water, took a slow sip, and said nothing. And that silence? That silence told me everything. This wasn't just some rumor I picked up or a theory I dreamed up on a bad day. This was truth. Her truth. The kind that curdles inside your chest when you've been carrying it too long. She opened her mouth again, but I didn't let her speak. Not yet. Because here's the thing. I didn't bring the letter to shame her. I brought it because I'm tired. Tired of pretending we're not all carrying ghosts around in our pockets. Tired of letting her define who I am while she hides who she used to be. I brought it because I wanted to see her face when the past she buried knocked on the front door and asked for a seat at the table. She finally whispered, "That's not your business." And I said, "You made it my business the second you decided I wasn't a real parent." She stood up, tried to collect the plates like nothing had happened. I let her. Let her walk into the kitchen and pretend she could scrub the moment out of existence like a stain on a casserole dish. Mark whispered, "Are you okay?" And I nodded. But I wasn't. Because the truth is, I didn't know where this was going next. I didn't know if I wanted a war or a reckoning or just a goddamn apology. I didn't know if Isabel, yes, I knew her name, would even want to meet the woman who gave her up and then spent the next 40 years pretending she was the kind of person who got to judge someone else's parenting. What I did know in that still, weirdly quiet dining room was this: if I opened that envelope, there was no going back. You don't forget the moment you're told you're not enough, not in passing, not in anger, not even by a stranger, but by the woman who gave you life, who was supposed to know better, who looked you in the eye and said it like it was fact carved into stone by someone more important than either of you. It wasn't a scream or a rant, not even a fight. It was a quiet dismissal delivered over overcooked meat and day-old bread rolls. Just words, I guess, if you're the kind of person who thinks words don't have weight. But for me, those words had been simmering for years, brewing quietly under my skin like poison under fingernails, waiting for the moment to make me feel like less than I am. "She's not even really yours." That was the first time she said it. That was 3 years ago when Juno was only 3, still soft around the cheeks and clumsy on her feet, running around the living room in footy pajamas and dragging a stuffed koala by one ear. Linda had come over to see how we were doing, which was code for checking whether the whole gay dads thing had turned our house into some kind of circus. She didn't mean it to be cruel, she'd say later. But that's the trick with her: everything that cuts is wrapped in politeness. Everything that stings comes with a smile and a plate of lemon bars. I remember Mark had gone to the kitchen to make tea, and I was sitting cross-legged on the rug with Juno in my lap, brushing her hair into little ponytails while she babbled on about a cartoon I'd never seen. Linda sat on the couch with her purse still in her lap like she wasn't planning to stay long, and then she said it, "You know, it's going to be hard for her when she starts school. Not having a real mom. Or a real dad." I looked up. I thought I'd misheard her. "Excuse me." She didn't blink. "I just mean, adopted children often struggle with identity, especially when neither parent is, well, biologically connected." I remember my hands shaking, trying not to let Juno see me getting angry. I remember swallowing it down, nodding, doing what I always did, pretending it was okay to be treated like an outsider in my own life, just because the person doing the hurting happened to be my mother. Mark came back into the room, handed her a cup of tea, kissed me on the head, and sat beside me on the floor like he always did, like we were the team we built ourselves into. She never liked that, our closeness, our calmness, the way we made parenting look real even without the parts she thought were necessary. She never came out and said it, but I saw it in her eyes every time Mark picked up Juno or wiped her chin or held her when she cried. It didn't matter how many times we changed diapers or stayed up through teething or kissed scraped knees. We were still, in her mind, playing house. Years before that, when we first told her we were thinking of adopting, she paused for so long I thought the line had gone dead. We were on the phone 1,000 miles apart, but I could still hear her disappointment vibrating through the air like static. "You sure that's what you want?" she asked finally, as if parenting was some casual decision, like getting a dog or painting the guest room beige. "I mean, don't you want one of your own?" Mark squeezed my hand that day. I said she would be our own. And Linda said, but not really. So when she called me a half-parent on Mother's Day, I wasn't surprised. Not really. That kind of judgment doesn't just show up overnight. It's layered into the wallpaper, woven into the stitching of every holiday meal and passive-aggressive gift. And don't think for 1 second it didn't hurt like hell. Because it did. It does. Not just because she doubts me, but because deep down, a part of me still wants her to be proud of me. I wish that part of me had died years ago, but it didn't. It lives there, under the armor, asking questions I pretend I don't hear. And you know what? I'll ask them out loud now. Can someone explain how blood matters more than love? If you've rocked a baby to sleep night after night, whispered "I'm here" during storms, held them through the fevers and the tantrums and the heartbreaks, doesn't that make you more than just real? Doesn't that make you everything? I've fed that child when she refused to eat. I've driven through the night to find the only 24-hour pharmacy when her fever hit 104. I've made up songs to make her laugh when she was scared of the dark. I've held her and said, "You are safe," more times than I can count. And I will do it again. And again. And again. Until my last breath. But still, she called me a half-parent. I almost laughed. Because if I'm a half-parent, then what was she? What do you call a woman who raised a child while burying another? Who created an entire family tree and snipped off one of its branches like it never existed? What kind of full parent chooses silence over accountability? She thinks I'm less because I didn't make Juno with my DNA. But Juno was made with something a hell of a lot stronger. She was made with commitment. With intentionality. With two people deciding they would love her no matter what came next. And that envelope? That cream-colored envelope she saw at the table? That wasn't revenge. It was a mirror. A mirror she didn't want to look in. Because I knew. I knew she'd been hiding something her whole damn life. I never meant to find it, and that's the part that still messes with me sometimes, even now, years later, when the truth is out in the open like a cracked window that never quite closes right again. I wasn't looking for anything, not really, unless you count nostalgia as a motive for climbing into the attic of your childhood home and rooting through boxes that haven't seen daylight since cable TV still came with a dial. It was the summer after Dad died quietly without fanfare, like everything he ever did, and Linda was, for the first time in my life, a little soft around the edges, which I took as a sign that maybe she'd finally lower the walls and let me know who she really was underneath all that judgment. She didn't. Instead, she asked me to help clean out the attic. Said she couldn't face it alone. So I drove 3 hours back to the house I swore I'd never sleep in again and climbed the same creaky stairs that used to be the soundtrack of my teenage anxiety. And I pulled down that wooden ladder with the little rope handle and stepped into the stale heat of 30 years' worth of hidden memories. The attic smelled like dust and old regret. Cardboard boxes stacked like gravestones of someone else's youth. Some labeled, some not. I worked my way through Christmas decorations, tax returns from the early 90s, and a box of clothes that still smelled faintly like my father's aftershave, some mix of pine and cigarette ash. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe yearbooks. Maybe baby photos. Maybe nothing. But what I found was a shoebox. It was a nondescript thing, Nike, men's size 10, duct tape wrapped clumsily around the edges like someone had tried to seal it shut in a hurry. It was buried under a stack of photo albums, all from my sister's ballet recitals and a family trip to the Grand Canyon I don't even remember being part of. Something about that shoebox pulled at me, and I'll admit it, I hesitated. I didn't know why, but I felt like opening it would change something I couldn't undo. Inside were a few things. A faded Polaroid of a girl I didn't recognize, a hospital bracelet with no name, a postcard from Milwaukee, and a letter. The letter was folded 3 times, yellowing at the creases, written in neat cursive handwriting that looked like someone had taken their time. It was addressed simply, to Linda. From Isabel. No last names. No dates. Just a name I had never heard in connection with my mother before. I read it once and then again, slower the second time, as if the words would be different if I gave them more respect. Isabel was 25 when she wrote it. She said she'd been looking for her birth mother for years, piecing together fragments from adoption records and church files and whatever scraps the agency hadn't redacted into oblivion. She said she didn't want to ruin anyone's life. She just wanted to know where she came from. If her laugh came from somewhere. If her stubbornness was inherited. If there was someone out there who looked at the sky the same way she did. And there it was, buried halfway down the page. I believe you are my birth mother, Linda May Holloway. I was born in April of 1983 at St. Joseph's Hospital. I was told my mother left town for 6 months that year and stayed with relatives. I understand if you don't want to meet me, but if you do, I'd love to hear from you. The letter was dated 7 years earlier. 7 years, and Linda had never mentioned it. Never even hinted at it. All those speeches about morality and family values, all the judgment she dished out like it was communion, and she'd been walking around with this secret strapped to her back like a ticking bomb. I sat there for a long time, holding that letter in my lap like it was a piece of dynamite. Everything started making sense in ways I didn't want it to. The way she flinched every time adoption was brought up. The way she tightened her jaw when people asked if I'd ever considered having kids of my own. The way she reacted when I brought Juno home, with a kind of distant politeness, like she was trying to pretend she was okay while something inside her was quietly unraveling. And that's when it hit me. She didn't hate that I adopted because she thought it was wrong. She hated it because it reminded her of what she gave up. I don't know what was worse, the hypocrisy or the pain behind it. Maybe both. I sat in that attic and felt the weight of her choices crush against my ribs like a fist I couldn't duck. I tried to picture her at 17, scared and alone and pregnant, probably wearing some ridiculous prom dress and wondering if her entire life was over before it even began. I tried to see her the way she never let me see her, human, vulnerable, scared out of her goddamn mind. But I couldn't shake the anger. Because instead of growing from it, instead of letting that experience teach her something about compassion, she turned it into a cage for the rest of us. She used her pain as a weapon and hid the blade behind a smile. I never told her I found the letter. Not then. I put everything back into the shoebox exactly how I found it and taped it shut again. I left it in the attic under the albums like a loaded gun wrapped in Christmas sweaters. But the image stuck in my head for days, Isabel writing that letter with hope in her chest, thinking maybe her mother would be proud to know she existed, that she survived, that she was out there trying to be whole. And instead, Linda left her unanswered, unread, and unknown. I never meant to find that letter. But once I did, it was like a switch flipped, and I finally understood why she hated how I became a dad. Because I chose to love what she once chose to let go. I waited nearly a year after finding the letter before I said a single word to anyone about it, and that silence did something to me, something quiet and slow, like water dripping onto stone until the crack forms, invisible at first, then wide enough to swallow the whole damn foundation. Every time I visited Linda after that attic discovery, I caught myself staring at her just a second too long, trying to read her face for signs of the girl she must have once been, trying to see some sliver of regret, some shadow of memory playing behind her eyes. But there was nothing, not even a hint. If it haunted her, she buried it deep. And me? I carried that letter around like a second spine, stiffening my posture in every conversation we had, reminding me of the truth she refused to say out loud. It was eating me alive, but I held on to it like some twisted badge of honor. I thought maybe if I waited long enough, she'd tell me herself. I thought maybe she'd wake up one day and look me in the face and finally admit that the pedestal she sat on had been built on top of a grave she pretended didn't exist. But she didn't. Of course she didn't. So one afternoon, when the weight of that silence felt like it might crush me completely, I decided to tell someone. Someone who might actually give a damn. Chloe, my little sister. We're 4 years apart and couldn't be more different. She stayed close to home, married her high school boyfriend, had 2 kids and a mortgage by 30. I moved halfway across the country, married a man, and adopted a child, which in Linda's eyes was basically like joining the circus and asking her to clap. But Chloe and I, despite the different paths, always had an unspoken understanding, like we knew what it meant to grow up under the same roof and still feel like strangers at the dinner table. We talked more after Dad died. Something about losing the one person who kept the house balanced, even in silence, made us realize we were all we had left that didn't come with strings. I invited her over one weekend while Mark took Juno to visit his sister. I made coffee the way she liked it, 2 sugars, splash of oat milk, cinnamon if I remembered. She brought muffins from that place she swears is better than it actually is, and we sat in my kitchen with the windows open, pretending it was just a regular Saturday and not the beginning of something irreversible. I didn't ease into it. I didn't want to give myself a chance to back out. I just said it, right there between sips of coffee and bites of lemon poppy seed. I found a letter from a woman named Isabel. She says she's Mom's daughter. Born in 1983. Given up for adoption. Chloe froze mid-bite, the kind of stillness you only see in animals when they're seconds away from running. "What did you say?" she asked, but her voice wasn't surprised. It was scared. "There's a difference." "I found it in the attic," I said, with a hospital bracelet and a photo. The letter was never opened. She put her muffin down, slowly, like it might explode if she moved too fast. Her hands were shaking. That's when I realized she wasn't hearing this for the first time, not really. "You knew something," I said, and she didn't deny it. She just closed her eyes and let out this tiny sound, like a sigh but sharper, like it hurt to let it go. "I didn't know," she said finally. "Not for sure. Not until now." I asked her what she meant, and she told me a story I'd never heard before. Said when she was about 17, Linda had gotten drunk at some cousin's wedding. Wine, mostly. A few shots of something pink and sugary. Chloe had driven her home, half amused, half annoyed, and when they pulled into the driveway, Linda slumped in the passenger seat and mumbled something Chloe hadn't been able to forget for the last decade. She said I never even held her. They didn't let me. They took her away before I saw her face. And then she passed out. I felt my whole body go cold. All that time, all those years. And Shed let us both live in that house without ever telling the full truth. She buried a daughter and raised 2 more children like nothing had happened, like love could be portioned out without consequence, like secrets wouldn't rot from the inside out eventually. I tried to ask her the next morning, Chloe said, but she pretended she didn't remember saying anything. Told me I must have imagined it. We sat in silence for a while after that, 2 grown adults trapped in the wreckage of a past we didn't create, staring into coffee cups like the answers might float to the top. Then she looked at me and said something I didn't expect, something that hit me harder than the letter ever did. "If you tell her," she said, her voice soft and steady, "you'll destroy her. And maybe that's what you want." I didn't answer right away because I didn't know if she was right. Was I holding this secret like a match just waiting for the right moment to burn it all down? Was I hoping Linda would finally crumble under the weight of her own hypocrisy just so I could stop feeling like the family freak? Or did I just want the truth to matter for once? "I don't want to destroy her," I said eventually. "I want her to see me. Really see me." Chloe shook her head slowly. "She won't. She can't. She's spent 40 years building the version of herself she wants the world to believe. And you, David, you were never part of that version." I looked down at the table and thought about Isabel. About a woman out there who still didn't know if the letter she sent ever reached the hands it was meant for. About a woman whose name lived in a box in an attic while the rest of us played pretend downstairs. And I realized something terrifying. Maybe Chloe was right. Maybe truth didn't heal. Maybe it just cracked things open that were better left sealed. But it was already too late. Because now I knew. And that meant something had to change. There are moments in life that don't come with music swelling in the background or dramatic lighting from the heavens, but they carry the same weight as a wrecking ball swinging through the front door of everything you thought was stable. That Sunday afternoon, Sitting across from my mother at the same damn dining room table I grew up trying to escape was one of those moments. There were no witnesses except the fading sunlight sneaking through the blinds and the stillness of a house built on denial, but in my chest, it felt like a courtroom had been assembled, and I was finally, after 42 years, ready to present the evidence. She was slicing apples. Not for anyone in particular, just something she always did when tension filled the room, like the act of preparing food could somehow scrub away the bile bubbling underneath her skin. I watched her hands more than her face because I didn't want to lose my nerve. I'd almost walked out twice already that day, telling myself there was no point, that she'd deny it, twist it, pretend she was the victim like she always did. But that envelope in my coat pocket felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric, and my silence had grown too heavy to carry anymore. I pulled the envelope out and placed it on the table without a word. She didn't look at it right away. She just kept slicing, thin and even, like the movement of her hands was more important than whatever was sitting 2 feet away from them. Then I spoke, not loudly, but firmly, the way you talk to someone who's been trying to pretend they don't hear you for decades. It's from Isabel, I said. The daughter you gave away. She stopped cutting. The knife stayed in her hand, hovering over the cutting board, and I saw a tremble ripple through her fingers. For a second, I thought she might faint, but she didn't. She just stood there, breathing like she'd been punched in the stomach, but still standing. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice betrayed her too fast, too tight, the kind of denial that doesn't even try to sound convincing. So I opened the letter. I unfolded the yellowing pages, now worn at the creases from the dozen times I'd read them alone in the dark, and I started to read it aloud, not as an accusation, but as a lifeline tossed into the pit she'd buried herself in. Dear Linda, I began, I hope this letter finds you in peace. I have no desire to disrupt your life. I only want to know if you think of me, if you ever did. My name is Isabel. I was born April of 1983 at St. Joseph's Hospital. I have spent years trying to find you, not for answers or confrontation, but for connection. I just want to know the woman I came from. Linda was frozen in place, but I saw the color drain from her face, saw her lips part like they were trying to shape a word that never arrived. I kept reading. I don't want to force myself into your world. I only ask that if there's any part of you that remembers me, even for a second, you consider meeting me. Or at least writing back. I stopped there. I didn't need to go further. She sat down slowly, as if her knees had finally betrayed her, and her hands clutched the edge of the table like it was the only thing holding her to this world. Her voice came out hoarse, barely a whisper. You had no right to read that. I leaned forward. I had every right. She's my sister. And you made sure she never got a chance to know that. She slapped the table so hard the knife jumped. I was 17. She screamed, and it echoed through the room, bouncing off the cabinets and the walls like some kind of confession torn from her throat by force. I didn't get a choice, she said again, but louder this time, shaking now, tears beginning to fall in angry streaks down her face. I didn't want to give her away. My parents made me. They said I'd ruin the family. They sent me to Michigan to hide, to carry her in secret like she was something to be ashamed of, and when she was born, they took her before I even touched her. I never saw her face. Not once. Her shoulders collapsed in on themselves like her own words had crushed her. I didn't speak. I let her unravel, let her sob and shake and choke on the weight she'd kept locked up for 4 decades. Because for the first time in my life, my mother wasn't lecturing me. She wasn't judging or pretending or polishing her version of the past to make it more acceptable. She was broken, human, real. But I wasn't ready to comfort her. Not yet. You raised us like you were the perfect mother, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You made me feel like I was failing every time I didn't meet your standards. And when I adopted Juno, you didn't just disapprove. You looked down on me. You treated my family like a project you didn't sign off on. All while hiding this. She stared at me through swollen eyes, mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. I would have understood, I added, my voice quieter now. If you'd told us. If you'd been honest. But you lied by omission. You let us believe we knew everything about our family when we didn't even know the number of children you had. She took a deep breath, the kind that sounds like it's trying to hold back another scream. You think I had a choice? She asked. I was 17. I had no power, no voice. And I carried that pain with me every goddamn day since. And then she said the thing that made everything stop, the thing I'll never forget, no matter how many years pass or how many times I try to forgive her. I didn't get a choice, she whispered. What's your excuse? It was the kind of question that doesn't get answered in a day. It was a mirror shoved into my hands, asking me what I was doing with my pain, with my judgment, with my own choices now that I finally held the truth. And I realized that even when the secrets come out, nothing is simple. No villain. No hero. Just people doing their best in the mess they're handed. But the silence? The silence was broken. And it would never go back to what it was before. There's something sickeningly familiar about guilt when it creeps in right after you finally speak your truth, the kind of truth you've carried too long, the kind that burns your insides out when it finally sees daylight. It doesn't matter how justified you feel in the moment, or how loud your anger screams that you did the right thing. Guilt doesn't care about justice. It only cares about wreckage. And after I read Isabel's letter out loud and watched my mother crack open like a dam giving way, guilt pulled up a chair beside me and lit a cigarette like it had been waiting patiently all these years to make its entrance. For days after that conversation, I kept waking up with the sound of her voice in my ears, that broken whisper. I didn't get a choice. What's your excuse? Playing on repeat like a goddamn curse. And the worst part? I didn't have an answer. I mean, I had reasons, plenty of them, but no excuse. Not for the way I dropped that letter like a bomb in the middle of her kitchen. Not for the silence I gave her afterward, like I was waiting for her to rebuild something I helped tear down. I knew what I did, and I knew why I did it, but that didn't make it noble. It just made it real. Mark noticed the shift before I said a word. He always does. He came into the bedroom one night while I was sitting on the edge of the bed, still dressed from work, staring at nothing in particular. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there holding a mug of tea like it might be the one thing that could fix whatever was unraveling inside me. Finally, he handed me the cup and sat down beside me. You've been somewhere else all week, he said, gently but firmly, like he wasn't asking for a lie. I nodded because it was true, and he knew it. I told him everything, the conversation with my mother, the breakdown, the silence that followed like an aftershock. I told him how I kept thinking about Isabel, about the letter, about the timeline of it all, and how this whole damn secret stretched across generations like a fault line. Mark listened without interrupting, which is why I married him. When I finished, he looked at me with that kind of softness that doesn't come with pity, just understanding. You're not the one who buried the truth, he said. But now you're the one holding it. And he was right. I had the letter. I had the name. I had a way to reach Isabel if I wanted to. She'd included an address, even a phone number, tucked at the bottom in smaller print, like she wasn't sure she had the right to take up space. I hadn't touched it since that night, hadn't written back, hadn't even typed her name into a search bar. But the temptation was growing louder every day. Because the longer I sat with it, the more it felt like silence wasn't safety anymore, it was complicity. Linda called me 2 days later. Her voice was calmer, flatter, like someone who had screamed all the rage out of her system and was running on fumes. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask how I was doing. She just said, "You haven't written back to her yet. I need you not to." I closed my eyes and leaned against the wall, feeling the cool paint press against the back of my head. Why? Her voice cracked just a little. Because it'll destroy everything. Destroy what? I asked. Your image? Your silence? What, Mom? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said, "Chloe doesn't know the whole story. Your father didn't know either." I didn't even tell the man I married. I carried it alone for so long I don't know how to carry it with someone else now. I bit my lip, trying not to say something I couldn't take back. But it came out anyway. That's not true. You didn't carry it alone. You put it on the rest of us without saying a word. We've all been carrying pieces of your silence, Mom. And now Isabel is out there, waiting for an answer, and you're asking me to stay quiet so you don't have to be uncomfortable. She'll hate me, she whispered. She might, I said. Or she might not. But she deserves to decide that for herself. Then she said the thing that made me go still. I never wanted her to feel like she was abandoned. That's why I didn't write back. I thought if I ignored it, maybe she'd think I didn't get her letter. Maybe she'd think it got lost. You wanted her to believe in a kinder version of you, I said. One that didn't leave. Even if that version was a lie. I don't know what else to do, she said. I'm asking you not to make this worse. And that was the moment it hit me, not like a revelation, but like a slow, awful recognition I'd been avoiding. So I asked her, who are you really protecting here? Me? Chloe? Or just yourself? She didn't answer. She hung up. And that silence said more than anything she could have tried to explain. That night, I sat at my desk with the letter beside me, Mark asleep in the next room, the whole house breathing softly in the dark. I opened my laptop. I typed Isabel's name into a blank document. And then I just sat there, hands hovering over the keyboard, not sure what story I was about to tell or who I was telling it for. All I knew was that someone needed to break the pattern. And maybe, just maybe, it had to be me. It started with a lie, a small one, the kind that feels justified in the moment because it's wrapped in good intentions, and you convince yourself that the ends will make the awkward means worthwhile. I told Isabel I was inviting her to a dinner with someone from the adoption community, someone with shared experience, someone who might understand what it's like to grow up with questions that don't have answers. I left out the fact that she'd be sitting across from the woman who carried her in silence for 9 months and spent the next 40 years trying to forget she ever existed. I told myself I was doing her a favor. I told myself Linda needed to face her past, and Isabel deserved the truth delivered by the only person who had ever held it. I told myself a lot of things because the truth, the real truth, was that I didn't know what the hell I was doing anymore. The dinner was set for Saturday. Nothing fancy, just my place, something homemade, enough wine to keep the edges of conversation soft. Mark didn't argue when I told him the plan, but he didn't approve either. He just raised his eyebrows and asked, "Do you really think this is the way?" I didn't answer him because if I said no, then I'd have to cancel the whole thing, and if I said yes, then I was responsible for whatever disaster might come barreling through my front door. I called Linda 2 days before and told her Isabel was coming, that I wasn't asking her permission and I didn't care if she agreed or not. She didn't yell. She didn't even sound angry. Her voice was quiet, hollow, like something in her had already decided not to fight. "What do I say?" she asked, and I replied, "Maybe start with hello and see if you make it past that." Saturday came in too fast and too loud. The kind of day that drags its feet until the last few hours rush toward you like a truck you can't dodge. I cleaned the house 3 times, checked the roast twice, and stared at the front door more often than the oven timer. Mark stayed out of it, wisely choosing to distract Juno with games and cartoons while I stood in the kitchen talking myself into believing that I could somehow control the outcome of what was about to happen. Linda arrived first, exactly 5 minutes early, dressed like she was attending a funeral instead of dinner. Black skirt, gray blouse, pearls, no makeup. She didn't hug me. She walked in like a guest at a stranger's house, her eyes scanning the room like she was looking for exits rather than comfort. I poured her a glass of wine, which she didn't touch, and we sat in silence for a few long, jagged minutes while she picked at a napkin and I stared at the clock, wondering if Isabel would show. And then the doorbell rang. My hands were cold when I opened the door, like my body had gone into some sort of shock, bracing for impact. Isabel stood there in jeans and a navy sweater, her hair tucked behind one ear, her expression more curious than nervous. She smiled, soft and unsure. "Hi," she said. "Thanks for inviting me." I nodded, stepping aside to let her in, and for a second everything felt weirdly normal. She looked around the house like any guest would, complimented the smell of dinner, commented on the photos of Juno on the wall. But then she turned the corner into the dining room, and Linda stood up from her chair, and the world stopped turning. No one said a word. Isabel didn't move. Linda didn't breathe. It was like watching two mirrors stand face to face, same bone structure, same eyes, same way of pressing their lips together when they were afraid of what might come out if they opened their mouths. They just stared at each other, not like family reunited, but like strangers on opposite sides of a story that neither one knew how to begin telling. I didn't know whether to speak or stay quiet, whether to intervene or let the silence do the talking. Eventually, Isabel said it. Just one word. "Mom?" Linda flinched, not dramatically, but enough for me to catch it. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she sat back down like her legs had given up the fight, and her hands gripped the edge of the table as if the weight of that word had knocked her off balance. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but it didn't sound like an apology, it sounded like a reflex. Isabel stepped further into the room, slowly, like she wasn't sure if this was some elaborate prank or a dream she hadn't woken up from yet. She pulled out a chair but didn't sit. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I'm not here to ruin your life or demand some explanation you're not ready to give. I just wanted to see your face. To know if you were real." Linda nodded and then shook her head, like both things could be true at once. "I was scared," she said. "And I stayed scared for a long, long time." The air in the room felt tight, like if anyone breathed too loudly the whole thing would snap in half. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched them, the mother who'd spent her life burying the past, and the daughter who had spent hers chasing a shadow. Neither of them cried. There was no dramatic embrace, no cinematic swell of emotion. Just the heavy, quiet ache of people realizing the space between them couldn't be filled with one dinner, or one conversation, or maybe even one lifetime. They sat down at the table, not like family, but like survivors of the same storm. They didn't touch their food. They didn't ask the obvious questions. They just sat there in the weight of it all, trying to breathe. And that's how it ended. No climax, no resolution, no neat little ribbon to wrap around it. Just two people staring at each other like two mirrors refusing to reflect. There's something about the sound of silverware against porcelain that makes silence even louder, like the scrape of a fork becomes the only thing tethering you to the moment, grounding you just enough to keep from slipping into the memories you don't want to touch. That sound, soft and steady, filled the room where Linda and I sat again, just the two of us now on another Mother's Day that was supposed to be about flowers and cards and forced affection, but instead felt like the aftermath of an earthquake where no one had yet bothered to clean up the mess. Isabel had left the night before, quietly and without ceremony, slipping out the front door with a kind but distant smile that said everything she wasn't ready to speak aloud. She hadn't hugged Linda, hadn't asked to see her again, hadn't left a phone number or an email or a promise. She just thanked me for the meal and told me she was going to spend some time near the lake before heading home. I didn't press her. I didn't beg her to stay. Because you can't rush someone who's spent their whole life waiting for a door to open only to find a hallway full of more locked ones. Now, here we were a day later, staring at roast chicken that neither of us had touched, steam curling up like the ghost of a tradition we'd failed to fulfill. Juno and Mark were at the park, giving me space I wasn't sure I wanted. Chloe hadn't come this year, citing some excuse about sick kids and a school project, but I knew the truth. She didn't want to sit in a room that had turned into a courtroom. Can't say I blame her. I barely wanted to be here myself, but I was. Maybe out of duty. Maybe out of exhaustion. Maybe because even after everything, some part of me still believed there was something left to salvage. Linda was picking at her napkin, folding and unfolding it like the fabric might provide some kind of distraction or escape. Her eyes looked tired, not just from age, but from something deeper, Like all the years she spent pretending finally caught up to her and settled behind her temples like fog that wouldn't lift. She hadn't said much since Isabel left, not beyond a few murmured pleasantries and the obligatory "thank you for dinner," like she was performing her part in a play she no longer understood. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't ask to be broken, the kind that feels like a third presence in the room, heavy and patient and unwilling to move until someone dares to acknowledge it. Then she finally spoke, and it wasn't loud, wasn't forced. It just slipped out the way truth sometimes does when you're too tired to filter it. "You were right." That was all she said at first. Just that. 3 words. And yet they landed like bricks on my chest because I didn't know what part of all this mess she was referring to. Was I right about Isabel? About the silence? About how she judged me for adopting while hiding the biggest secret of her life? Or was it something smaller, something private, something I didn't even realize I'd struck a nerve on? I didn't ask what she meant. Maybe because I was afraid of the answer, or maybe because some part of me already knew and didn't want to hear it spoken aloud. She looked at me then, and it was one of those rare moments where I saw her not the version she showed the world, not the voice of correction or pride or disapproval, but the person underneath all that armor. The girl who'd been 17 and pregnant and terrified, and the woman who had never truly forgiven herself for surviving it. "You were right," she repeated, "about what it means to be a parent. It's not about biology. It's not about blood or names or birth certificates. It's about showing up. Every day. Even when it hurts." She paused, and I could tell she was fighting something behind her eyes, tears maybe, or anger, or shame. I didn't know. Maybe all of it. "I was scared of you being a better parent than I ever was," she said, voice shaking now. "And when you adopted Juno, I saw you do something I never had the courage to do. Choose to love someone who didn't come from you and mean it." I swallowed hard, not trusting my voice yet. I wanted to say something, to meet her halfway, to tell her that it wasn't too late, that there was still time to try again. But I didn't know if that was true. Some things can't be undone, even with good intentions. Some doors, once closed, don't open the same way again. She stood up slowly, the motion deliberate, like her body had to ask permission from her heart before she moved. She placed the napkin gently beside her untouched plate, smoothed the wrinkles from her blouse, and looked at me one last time, not with regret or even sadness, but something more complex, something I couldn't quite name. "You'll be a better parent than I ever was," she said, even if it took me 42 years to say it. Then she turned and walked toward the door, her footsteps soft against the hardwood floor, the kind of soft that says this isn't a storm leaving, it's the eye of one that just passed. She didn't ask me to walk her out, didn't offer a hug or a promise to call. She just opened the door and disappeared into the sunlight like it might carry her somewhere she could finally breathe. I didn't follow her. I sat there, surrounded by food no one had eaten and chairs that felt more like monuments to silence than seats. I just sat there wondering, was that a confession or a goodbye?